At this time, we are going to transition right into our next session. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for our last panel and for being with us for our next one. Our next panel is about celebrating a year of change and opportunities ahead. And we'll get right into it. At this time, I will go ahead and transition the control of this session over to Ted Wells, who's going to moderate this panel. And Ted Wells is the Vice President of Client Services for STEMconnector. He has been with Together We Grow since day one and is in this sweet spot of the amazing panel that we have for this session. So Ted, I will turn it over to you. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Kristen. It's great to see everybody, and a great group of, you're going to be in for a treat. Probably not hear me speaking so much. Hopefully this amazing group of women. I think we've got a couple more folks who are going to be joining us, Ebony and Dr. Morris as well. So I'd just like to say thank you again for joining this impactful discussion. And we all know, how much hard work Kristen puts into, and the team at Together We Grow puts into making this a great, all the meetings that we do and keeping us going all year. So thank you very much, Kristen and team, for all you do to keep this work, this really important work, advancing in this coalition of very busy people engaged. So here's Ebony. The last year, which has been a challenge on so many fronts, has, given us this opportunity, I think, to really face some hard truths around the work we do around diversity, equity, inclusion, has forced us to rethink maybe things that we thought were the best way to do things and do them profoundly differently across sectors. And so this is a very interesting group of folks that you'll have joining us today. And specifically, we look to have a panel that represents the diversity of this coalition. And so we have industry represented, of course, because there's a big focus on employment and employment outcomes. We also have higher education represented, as well as sort of a leading nonprofit organization that focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ebony Weber, who's a panel. I'll just go through the list. Ebony Weber, who's from Executive Directors at MANRRS, Minorities, Agricultural, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences. And we also have Dr. Pamela Morris from illustrious Purdue University. We have Jennifer Deitloff from Scoular. Philomena Morrissey Satre from Land O'Lakes, and Demetha Sanders from Cargill. So today's discussion, we're going to look at some of these challenges. It just felt kind of like we kept getting kicked this past year in 2020, 2021, and continue to be a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. So, interested to see what you've learned, what you've responded, and then hopefully everybody here on this is going to who's going to be in the audience is going to be coming up with some great questions that we can include on the back end of this. Please obviously use the chat, and we want you to walk away with some actionable insights and actionable ideas and insights into this space. So, Ebony, I'm gonna start with you. MANRRS is an amazing organization. I've worked with you guys for a number of years. Continue to find new ways to partner. I know this has been, quite an important year for MANRRS, and a lot of the communities that you represent, the students that you serve. Just wondering if you could kind of give us an update as what's happened, where are you going, what have you learned, how has 2020 affected your practice?
Well, first, good afternoon to everyone out there as part of Together We Grow Consortium. It's good to be here with you all. Thanks for having us. Wow. kicking off from 2020, I think when everything really came full circle, we were a couple of weeks away from our national conference, our 35th anniversary that was being hosted by many of our partners here that was going to be in the Twin Cities. So we were pumped and ready to go. And then everything crashed and started falling down around us. So, that quarter immediately preceded, after of us having to basically dismantle our whole conference and kind of go through that rigorous process of refund credits and reshipment and all of those things. And then the murder of George Floyd happened and everything just really stopped. It was, I guess for lack of better words, it was the first time as an organization, I felt like we were seen and heard. And we were kind of thrust into the spotlight of now being this collaborative partner and this thought leader for many of our partners that we already work with, but a lot of new entities as well. So for one, it was phenomenal growth for us as an organization, just with the number of partners that we collaborated with, that we worked with, the number of new programs as well that were developed throughout this last year. One being our DE&I webinar series that we worked on over last summer that ended up having over 15,000 views across social media that, highlighted a number of issues and areas around diversity, equity, inclusion, and racism in American agriculture. And then lastly, I think it was our shift from being heavily reliant on in-person events to totally shifting to being virtual, engaging with students and really meeting our partners and our members where they were. So that presented a lot of challenges, a lot of learning as you go. But I think it allowed us to expand our base of students that we work with. We got to engage with a lot more students who, for whatever reason, were not able to travel to many of the in-person events. And we were able to really expand the programming. So, because in-person wasn't a barrier, we were able to accommodate a lot more speakers, a lot more different subject matter experts on topics that really expanded our students' pathways and perspectives around agriculture. So it was a transformative year for the organization, to say the least.
Yes, it sounds like that. And we've been in touch, and every time you're like, there's just so much going on. It's good, right? But challenging. So, and thank you for doing such important work. Why don't we go to before we head into industry, this has been everybody I work with in higher ed, this has been a tough year. Every school's doing something different. Dr. Morris, I wonder if you could share a little bit about, what things are being, what has the impact been on your work at Purdue? How are things going there? And then even you've been in this space for your extremely experienced, maybe some perspectives overall on some of the challenges that higher ed's facing as it confronts, these challenges and opportunities.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you to Together We Grow Consortium for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So good afternoon, everyone. I've been talking a lot today, so I'm kind of hoarse, so please overlook that. But yes, we had a lot of challenges, and I think I can concur with what Ebony just shared about the challenges we had to, of course, right before our spring break, back in March, COVID came into play. And so we began to shut down and go online. And so all courses had to go online. That was a challenge. It wasn't as challenging for me because I already had an online segment for my course. And so I just took that template and that structure and put it into place for my face-to-face course. But other faculty members struggled if this was for the first time that they had to consider going online. We've been talking about, as many universities across the country have been talking about, online instruction, online classes. And so it really forced many faculty members to just jump into the fire. And that was, I think, not as successful as we had hoped for it to be, because in a matter of a week, no longer than 2 weeks, faculty had to restructure their course for online. That's something that when I went online with one part of my course, I mean, I worked for months to get that into place so that it would be receptive to students and accessibility would be there in place for students to be successful in an online environment. Online is, I don't think, from my perspective, is not for everybody. Everybody doesn't learn well online. Everybody doesn't read well online. And so you have to take that into consideration. And some students just really struggle. A lot of students just kind of dropped out from that space before the end of the semester because there were challenges. Accessibility was a challenge. And, you know, we thought we tried to address that, especially when it comes to equity, you know, knowing that some students didn't have a laptop at home. They couldn't access, they didn't have the bandwidth to be able to access their course for the remaining of the semester. So what solution? I mean, we had to come up with quick solutions, you know, on the spot. So some students were told, go to the library. Well, if you're living in a rural area and the library is still a distance away, that really became a barrier for some students living in a rural area. And so those are the kinds of things I think that became challenges for students just trying to connect to their course. So we saw a lot of students that hesitated even coming back last fall, you know, not being able to connect. You know, right now, I think across this country, we're in a place where our institution has adopted the framework of inclusive excellence, where you embed diversity, equity, inclusion in everything that you do. It should eventually be part of the fabric of everything that we do here at the institution. That has, you know, that has created some, I think, opportunities, but it's also created some barriers for people. And so we have to keep in mind that our students were struggling a lot of, and one thing that we really haven't talked about is the mental anguish that a lot of our students went through last year and are still experiencing. And so that social distancing that we've had and that, you know, that still exists for us here today, because if you consider the Delta variant that's really surging at this time, even though we went back to face-to-face classes this fall, still students are struggling. They didn't have that social network last year. That was an issue. Our MANRRS organization, I'm the primary advisor for MANRRS. Our MANRRS organization struggled. Students just didn't want to continue to connect. They had difficulties connecting through a Zoom call. And how do we keep that social environment there for the students? And so that was one of the big challenges I think students face, just being lonely. There was a lot of loneliness, a lot of disconnect, and that really impacts a student's emotional stability. And so those were some of the challenges that we didn't maybe think about at the beginning of COVID when we all became aware of it. And so that impacted students. It impacted their performance, their academic performance, and it impacted their social life. And so we had to struggle with that. Are things better? I think they're getting better, but I still see that there's some emotional issues going on still for a lot of students. My class this academic year is still virtual. I have 170 students in my would have been face-to-face class. My online class is still online, and we've got about 50 students in that class, but I'm still meeting with these students virtually. So they're still having difficulty connecting, feeling that connection, feeling that I know who they are, even though if I had them face-to-face, I still wouldn't know who all of them were with 170 students sitting in front of me. That would be difficult, but at least that physical connection would be there to help students feel that sense of, or maybe not a sense of belonging, but at least feel that I'm aware of them. And so we've really been working with inclusive excellence, helping students, helping faculty, helping staff. Let's don't leave faculty and staff out of this conversation, because faculty and staff, many faculty and staff still are struggling with this social distancing, and we have to still wear masks. And so I think it's had a great impact on the way that we function. One opportunity that we did have, and I think Ebony alluded to this, is that I work with our Office of Research and Graduate Programs to recruit students into our grad program. And that did lend us, because we were virtual, an opportunity to expand. And so we were only working with 4 institutions that we had targeted a few years ago. And so working virtually, it did allow us to expand. And now we have reached out and working with 10 universities. And so we went from 4 to 10. And so so that helped us to see, wow, okay, there are other ways rather than going in person to recruit that we can work together to recruit students from other institutions into some of our grad programs. So that was an opportunity that came out of this pandemic from last year, that began last year.
I'm always amazed at how much you guys have going on at these schools. Like there's, but I clearly, taking this holistic approach is to thinking about not the students and also that, like, not just the achievement in the classroom, but also sort of the challenges they face. I've seen a lot of discussions about mental health. I know the National Academies is doing a workshop in a couple of weeks on mental health in higher ed. It's definitely emerging as a research area. Thank you very much, Dr. Morse. So I'm going to move on to industry. We are going to hear from our industry folks. And Jenny, help me. I didn't get the correct pronunciation of your last name. Deitloff, is that right?
Debt, like I'm in debt. Deitloff.
Deitloff. Okay. Well, Jenny, we had the opportunity to catch up last week, and you shared with me some of the work that you're doing at Scoular around, really kind of early stage developing a culture of DE&I and advancing kind of some principles in your organization. And it sounded like there was that the response to the pandemic, the external events, provided an opportunity for you to kind of advance this process even maybe a little more effectively than anticipated. Just wondering if you can share sort of about where you guys are coming from, where you're going, and the story that maybe give folks a little background on where you were before.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, yeah, as I look at this panel, Scoular in our journey, we are definitely in our infancy compared to very robust programs that others have. But I have been a recipient of help from many people on this call, which is awesome. This is what's really great about the D&I space is people just want everyone to move forward. But with Scoular, we actually kicked off, gosh, it seems like 5 years ago now, but very beginning of 2019, we decided after some work with our leadership team, knowing we had the support and really the energy around getting something going around diversity inclusion and starting to bring those concepts and behaviors into the workplace. We started a little bit differently. We kicked off with a diversity inclusion council that's about 10 people across our organization, representing different businesses, geographies, levels in the organization. And we took that council and put them through probably 6 months of just really robust level setting training. We kind of dove into all the foundational areas that they needed to be aware of. Spent probably 2 solid days, which was intended to be in person with this group, but two days a month with the group really through for about the first 6 months. And then we continued the education, but we pivoted them toward developing our very first diversity inclusion strategy. So while we had a framework prepared for them, we really wanted the council to take ownership over what felt right for Scoular, because at the core, one of our guiding principles was it has to be authentic. We can't come out of the block saying, we've got this all figured out, because spoiler alert, we don't. But we knew we wanted to move forward, and we knew we wanted listen and learn and be aware, but also take some action. So that group got together in January of 2021. They rolled out our very first strategy to the organization, and we've been working and delivering on that since then. So I'll say it just kind of as part of that for us, really, I talked about the authenticity, but really building awareness and providing as much learning opportunity as we could was really important for us. I don't know if it's because of the pandemic that gave us a window or had people be interested in it, but we, kicked off with some pretty robust programming that was all voluntary and had a pretty high significant amount of people attend and truly be engaged, which was really exciting for me, and just showed us that there's really a desire for that and for us to continue and move forward. So if there's anything the pandemic, I'm going to call that a win from the pandemic, and let's just go with that.
Yeah, the silver linings are sometimes hard to find over the last year, so
I don't know if there's a correlation there, but let's call it one, okay?
Philomena, I'm going to turn to you now. I mean, you're located in the Twin Cities area, and have been working in this space, and Land O'Lakes is and continues to be a leader around, particularly in the agribusiness space, but just overall around diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. When we talked before, I'd love for you to sort of share an update as to what's happening at Land O'Lakes. Also, and Demetha, when you're next, both of you are in the Twin Cities. That was really the epicenter of sort of the primary exogenous event that I think focused on the murder of George Floyd, and focusing on, people kind of maybe asking some questions that they hadn't really cared to answer, ask themselves, think about, and people were kind of going through a lot of things in terms of, sort of awareness. You mentioned that when we were talking before, so I'd love for you to kind of talk about that, and then Demetha, after, I'd love for you to share what's going on at Cargill. And also sort of looking at that same question, just being in Twin Cities and being kind of, it was literally in your backyards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Ebony and Jenny, for your remarks prior. So yeah, we are located in the Twin Cities, and I will say, I've been in this field for a long time, and probably for sure the most intense, of any of the years. And not only for practitioners, but for all of our employees, especially those that are located in the Twin Cities. And then layer on that employees who had previously worked at headquarters, we were all working remotely. And so you don't have that face-to-face or be able to give people hugs or, things that you might do to support. But I would say, some things that we did is really leaned on our employee resource groups during this time. We have an African ancestry employee resource group. They held a couple of sessions with our CEO, CHRO, members of their team, along with myself. Our first listening session, we had 800 employees participate from around the country. And I think what was helpful with that is to provide a way for people to better understand, to listen, to talk about all of the emotions that our employees and leaders are facing, we're facing, as well as resources that are available. And Dr. Morris talked about that, the mental health and well-being. And so for that particular session, all the sessions that we've held, we have highlighted, we just like Serendipitous had hired a mental health therapist prior to COVID for Land O'Lakes employees, and she has job security. So really great information that she can help employees, as well as a lot of other things. So that was one, and multiple events that were held. Our Asian Affinity Group really helped us better understand the impact of COVID on the Asian community and people of Asian descent, and sharing like their personal experience of what has happened, right? And what we can do to become allies and better support if we hear at work or we're out somewhere in our communities. So that's a really important piece. And then we had a group formed last year, an employee resource group called Parents and Caregivers. And Ebony, you might not have seen this, but we saw your little guy pass through the room. And so I have 3 kids in their 20s, but great empathy for parents, like, how do we do this? How do we work? How do we become teachers? How do we have the, capacity to do it all? And we don't always. And so our parents and caregiver group really helped us better understand, how can we as an organization support? Our CEO is the mom of 3, so she could speak on authentically about that, as well as like, how do we take care of yourself, take care of others, as well as those of us. I have a mom who's 84 who cannot be contained, but needs to be contained sometimes. But how do we do that? Elder care. So, I think what we saw with the pandemic is the convergence, right? So we are employees of an organization, but there are all these things that happen outside of work in our communities to us as family members. And then how do we best support? So I think those were some of the things, Ted, that we really have grappled with. And I think the other piece, and I'm sure all our panelists would agree, there's no roadmap. So we can't go back in time and be like, hey, I wonder how they did this 10, 20 years ago. We're all trying to figure it out. But I think the benefit of Together We Grow in these different consortiums is the power of what happens when we work together, right? And we share best practices, promising practices, or hard knocks, like, how'd you do that? Here's how we did it, didn't work. And so my partner Demetha is next, so I'm sure she can add more to this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Philomena.
Go for it, Demetha.
Thank you. So we sit, miles apart from each other in the Twin Cities. And so what happened in 2020 impacted all of us. But Cargill is a company that's 155,000 employees in 70 countries. So when we start talking about the implications, the impact of everything that was going on, it was more than just what's happening here in the Twin Cities. And it was important for us to recognize that. And even though, we know that the pandemic kind of kicked some of this off, we started dealing with the pandemic implications before March because we have teams that are in Asia. And we learned from what they were doing there to apply some of those learnings in the United States as well, or across the rest of our organization to support our teams how to do this well. We kind of learned from them how to do this well and leverage that to continue moving. And then in the middle of all of that, we had, what happened with George Floyd here in the Twin Cities that just brought everything to a head. I think what's important for us as an organization, we know that we are critical to the food supply chain. If Cargill doesn't work, you don't eat. That's pretty much how it works. And so our teams had to be on point to work, even during this incredibly stressful time for our organization. We leveraged the power of conversation. I think Philomena mentioned it. We allowed our teams to have space to talk. We allowed them to have space to lead and even space to step away from all of this if they needed to. It was important for us to create an opportunity for all of our teams to understand their roles in creating a safe space for everyone in the organization. It was important to not put this on our Black Employee Network, our Ebony Council, our Asian Alliance to deliver on this. This is a role, all of us have a role to play here. Our teams were really curious about how they could support. And so our roles became more about building capability inside the organization, teaching people how to do this work so that it wasn't just looking at our Black Employee Network or our Asian Alliance. When we did in February last year, a racial equity challenge so that people could understand the historical context behind what was happening. And it was available to everyone. So not just the people in the United States, we had people in other parts of the world that wanted to understand it too. Our teams in Brazil said, we understand that we can align with that as well. So we actually need to do some work on our side as well. It's not just happening here. So this idea of building capability, helping our leaders, helping our entire team become a part of the solution was something that I would say was a win for us last year in the work that we've continued to do. It opened up a conversation that frankly, I'm not sure that we'd ever really had before, or a conversation that we probably wouldn't have had these things not happen. So we've done racial equity challenges across all the different groups. We've done lots of education for our employees around all the different implications, not just in the US, not just with our Black employees, but across everything, because we created that space. The engagement has been incredible. We have some really good engagement. When we think about the number of views, the visits to the sites, the people that are downloading and uploading information, it has been amazing to see the organization really step up and try to do this differently. I would say that I know I've been working in this space with Cargill for a couple of years, but it's been really refreshing to see how the organization has kind of come together and have a singular focus on what it is that we're trying to solve for, really understand how we're going to go after this. It's not just lip service. It's not just a few things that we said we're going to do here and there. It's really about changing the dynamic inside the organization and in the communities in which we serve.
That's great. I love that, the talking about gaining traction among groups who traditionally have not felt it was their purview to work in the DE&I space. And I think it just speaks to that sort of larger point that DE&I is not, that this work is not something that's a nice to have, it's a must have in organizations in order for them to be effective and for them to be safe places of work. And and I think maybe definitely it seemed like anecdotally that there was a shift over the last year as folks kind of started to think a little bit more. Ebony and Dr. Morris, I'm just wondering, you're here 3 employers on this panel. What are you seeing from students as they're looking into the how students' perspectives on employment? I know this is sort of a question that sort of is emerging that we didn't necessarily cover, but I think it sinks well. And like, what are you seeing in terms of students looking out into jobs in the workforce? Have those expectations shifted? Are there different expectations around diversity? Is it an inclusive work environment? Just kind of wondering on the student side, and how your organizations are interfacing with employers. What's changed?
Dr. Morris, I know you work more closely with students. You want to lead and I can come behind you?
Certainly, yes. We have a requirement in our college that we put in place back in 2006. We added a multicultural awareness requirement to our core curriculum here in our college. And we did that for a specific reason. Number one, what we were hearing from some of the recruiters who represented Cargill, Land O'Lakes, and many of the corporations within the industry coming to tell us that, we are hiring students and predominantly white male students, and they're just not ready to communicate effectively with people who look different from them. And so, what can you do to help us? And so that's why we created this new space in our core curriculum. And so I was asked to develop a course, Communicating Across Cultures, which is a course that we hope that any course, and we have other courses across the college and across the campus that can fulfill this requirement for undergraduate students, but we want them to be well prepared to come out into a diverse environment and be able to communicate appropriately and effectively. So we are trying to really move our students toward becoming interculturally competent. And so the course that I teach, the purpose of this entire requirement is to help prepare students to come out into the workplace, because we know that a lack of diversity consciousness is costly. It's not costly for us per se, but it is costly for the corporations, because if you hire someone in and they can't work well with others, then you're going to have your productivity will decline, more lawsuits put in place, which will be costly for your corporation, having legal fees to pay for discrimination. And so we want to prepare students. We know it's imperative in the 21st century and before the 21st century, but definitely in the 21st century, we're becoming more and more diverse each and every day. And as we prepare these students to come through the pipeline out into the corporate world, we want students to be prepared to develop those soft skills, those interpersonal skills that are necessary in order for students to be able to understand other perspectives as well as their own perspective. And so that's what we really focus on here in our college. The university has a committee, the university core curriculum. Their committee right now is conducting an environmental scan across the campus to find out if they, I mean, in agriculture, I'm not bragging, but we're leading the way. We started this back in 2006, and they are using us as a template for others across the campus, because we know that we have to prepare students to come out into the workplace. And so that is the focus. Just had a meeting with one of the members of the University Core Curriculum Committee, and he was informing us that this is important for our entire campus, not just for the College of Agriculture. So we're very proud of what we're trying to help our students do. Is there some resistance? Of course, students don't see, well, why is this necessary? Why do we need to know this? Why do we need to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so helping the students to become more aware of themselves and their own identities and how that will play into who they are and how they interact with people who are from different parts of the world, from different communities, difference in general. And so that's what we're doing.
Hey, Ted, yeah, I think at MANRRS, we're definitely taking a more grassroots approach, given with our focus and investment in junior MANRRS. I think we're kind of starting with the first piece of just exposing and building the pipeline, getting more students interested in food, ag, and natural resource related disciplines. I think for us, it's about talking about the number of new partners. So again, educating and bringing awareness to all the different career pathways that are out there into the industry, as well as the new ones that are not even being thought of, that are currently still in development. And I think for us, it's also this, with this new generation of students, is to focus on entrepreneurship and innovation. I think honestly, a lot of students or this generation isn't particularly focused on spending 40, 50 years in industry. So I think a lot of them are very much about upward mobility. They're definitely about flexibility and being able to monopolize and capitalize on their technical skills that they've developed in the industry. So I think for us, it's about helping them explore and find ways to those various fulfillments that they're looking for within careers that doesn't look traditionally like they've always looked in the past.
Thank you. That's great. I think turning back to, and I don't want to separate our groups, but I do like sometimes the industry folks, there's a set of questions that I've kind of got in mind. Thinking about this, and please, I just put a note in the chat, feel free to drop questions in. If you do have a question for a specific individual, please, make sure to mention that individual. So, but I'd find to ask questions for the group. I've noticed, in one of our partners is a large corporation, and not in the ag space, but as they've started to address social justice issues in their company, they've really looked externally around partnerships and do these philanthropic investments, does their recruiting strategy. Are you all seeing, sort of like really thinking, how does this permeate through a lot of different layers of the company? At your respective companies, was that something that was kind of in place already, or is it something that you've maybe moved towards in the last year, or is it still kind of a work in progress? Anybody on the?
I can start. We had always been looking at our partnerships, our relationships, and making sure that it was connected to what we were doing when it came to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We actually elevated some of that and started thinking differently about some of those partnerships and what we are holding the partners accountable to and what we're holding ourselves accountable to as well. So it's always been there, but I think we kind of, when I say added to how we approach some of those partnerships. One of the things that we heard from universities is companies are just throwing money at us and running. And that's not what we wanted to do. We didn't want to be that partner that said, hey, here's $100,000 and we're out. We knew that there was more work that we needed to be done. So we were very thoughtful about building our partnerships with our university partners. We went small rather than broad, picked a few universities that we wanted to partner with and focused our efforts there. Our efforts when it comes to racial equity have been pretty, I would say we've done a lot this last year. Philomena put in the chat about the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. It's something that Cargill has been involved in heavily this last year. We're also a part of the CEO Action Network for Racial Equity. We joined 110, which is all about hiring Black Americans in roles. We are a part of the Management Leadership of Tomorrow Racial Equity Certification, Black Equity at Work Certification Program. So we have added to our portfolio of what we were partnering with to ensure that we were driving change in the places that we had committed to. So racial equity was one of those things as a part of our strategy. We happen to be in a nice, interesting space. Last year, we were in the middle of revising our DEI strategy when everything started going crazy in the world. So the pandemic and what happened in the United States. It actually gave us more of a platform for what we were going to put in the strategy, to start thinking differently and adding something that we probably wouldn't have put in there before. So for example, addressing anti-Black racism, it wouldn't have showed up in our strategy before, and now it does. Very specifically, very pointed, calling it out. And when we start to look at partnerships and how we invest in the community, we are making sure that the partnerships are aligned to the things that we have as a part of our strategy. So we are over-investing in places that are a part of the strategy. It doesn't mean we don't invest other places, but we're making sure that we're creating a balance between that work. So we were always doing it. I think we're just getting better at it based on, now this new thinking about how we should approach these partnerships.
Interesting.
And I'll just add on to what Demetha said. I think the hard part when there's a crisis, there are so many opportunities, right? And literally we could spend all our time in external things. So it's like, how are we strategic? How do we look for alignment? What's going to work best for us? And so we formed at Land O'Lakes a racial equity social justice team. And so that's kind of and we have myself, HR, government relations, business representation. So as we look at who are those organizations that we should be involved with, right? Where do we have capacity? Who should be involved? So that's kind of our intake group, which I think is helpful. Another thing that we did too is we have a community giving campaign every year. We're right in the midst of it and have historically supported the United Way all across the country. Last year, for the very first time, we added in 4 organizations focused on racial equity and 4 on hunger as a result of COVID. And so just like, what are the things that we have historically done? And then how do we put that lens, kind of what Demetha said, on racial equity and social justice? What does that look like? And then, of course, we love working with MANRRS, Ebony, and have been a long-term partner with that, and having many different people within the organization be a part of it, because I think that's a piece too. How do we get people from the business and HR and talent acquisition, DEI, all different pieces within the organization, because that's where we get the influence then, right? Because then the business is like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing organization. We should hire more. Why aren't we hiring more? And so I think that's a piece of it too. And then lastly, I'll just say the importance of telling our story, right, to employees as well as externally, because a lot of times in this DEI work, we are heads down and we're doing the work. And, we are fortunate to have an amazing communications team that helps us tell that story. So our employees then can become spokespeople for Land O'Lakes, like, hey, this is what, did you know this is what we're doing, right? Or we can talk about it externally. So as we're really looking at hopefully attracting super talented people to come to Land O'Lakes, they'll be like, oh, they have a culture there that would support me. I could see myself working there.
Awesome. Jenny?
Yeah, I might just add, we, as we're getting started, we certainly don't have the robust build out of third-party relationships Demetha and Philomena just referred to. But I will say one thing that I think has been a positive at Scoular is, as we've been kind of going through this very intentional awareness and education campaign, not just with our council, but offerings that we've had through our ERGs or other opportunities within Scoular, we have seen people who are engaged in this look at partners in the community, whether it be a customer or an opportunity for a community engagement, and connecting the dots to how there might be a social impact lens to that, or a connection. So we're able to kind of really get our leaders to start thinking about, yeah, I'm going to contribute to this organization, but how does that look through a D&I lens, and kind of connecting the dots. So for us, it's been exciting to see kind of some of those connection points being made. And kind of bringing it all together, because we've, at the same time we were talking about diversity and inclusion, we started talking about, sustainability and corporate responsibility. And so helping people thread that needle and having them do it on their own is really makes me hopeful.
So my guess is that 4 out of the 5 of you your organizations had banner years. Made, Ebony, we got a lot of MANRRS is growing. It was a good year. Cargill, Lando Lake, Scoular, you guys rocked it. Dr. Morris, higher ed has been through the ringer from a financial standpoint. But, as we always know, we've always had this conversation around higher ed, and is this model just hanging on by shoestrings and paper clips and Scotch tape? Just wondering, sort of like moving forward, like, were you able to figure out some things around financial sustainability for the organization as a result of this for Purdue? And I mean, I know you're in a part of a big organization, but it seems like the financial challenges of the last year have probably transformed your institution in some respects, no?
Yes, our president, Mitch Daniels, who is the former governor of Indiana, when he came in as president, we've had a freeze on tuition for the last, 5 or 6 years. And so when we begin to lose students, and especially last fall when students didn't return, it did impact us at the university level as well as each of the colleges. We felt that impact. We felt that, we felt the financial impact of not having the type of budget that we were normally accustomed to. It impacted our ability to travel. Not that we did save some money because, we were banned from doing any kind of international travel. We were banned from doing any kind of domestic travel. And so travel is just now beginning to start up. So we did save money from that perspective. And I think what happened is that once the senior administration here at Purdue discovered that, wow, we can save money if people don't travel as much, then it's kind of, they put in some new policies, I think, relative to travel that will, I think, help us from, or keep us from maybe traveling as much as we did before. So there's some policies in place. They learned from that experience that we don't need all this travel. Travel is necessary if it is directly connected with your research. And so those researchers, were the first ones to go out and travel abroad or travel domestically, because they didn't want to place any barriers around scientists being able to conduct their research. And so, but if that was a necessity, then you could go. But as far as just attending a conference, unless you were presenting, then it was not approved. And so I think we're going to be more conservative when it comes to the funding around budgets, to say the least. We're definitely going to be more conservative. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And so our business office manager at the top, who manages all of the university's resources, I'm sure has seen a way to be creative as a result of COVID, putting up these barriers and all these bans on travel. So I can say that much, but it has affected us. I mean, last year, we didn't give any merit raises. And so this year, everybody looked forward to a merit raise. They weren't, of course, they didn't make up for last year not receiving one, but it did help the morale, especially for staff. You know, staff were really, a lot of our staff were struggling. You know, we weren't even keeping up with inflation for staff. And so that posed a real challenge for, I think, a lot of our staff members.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked that question is because the pandemic, in a lot of respects, the response to the pandemic has just had such uneven impact. You know, here we are with, you know, it's not like 2008 economic crisis when, you know, pretty much everything sank. I mean, certain things were hit worse than others, but this was really, you know, this crisis has been particularly like if you're restaurants, things like that, movie theaters, and I've thought, you know, of educational institutions in that.
Absolutely.
I saw a nice question from Mark Stewart, and I love this notion that, yeah, sometimes when the crisis happens, like, you know, we're all friends and where everybody's online, we're moving forward. You know, is there, like, how do we ensure this keeps going? Do you guys have some thoughts on that as a group of experts? Like, how do we make this part of who we are and what we do?
From my perspective, it was important for us to not make this feel like a event or a one-time initiative or something that we were doing in response to something. I think Dr. Morey said earlier, it has to be woven through the DNA of the organization. It has to be a part of who you are as an organization. So we focused our efforts on ensuring that the work that was happening wasn't just happening with the DEI team. I always say, I can't solve this for you. This is a team sport. All of us have a role to play here. So we focus our efforts on ensuring that it was something that was built into the fabric of the organization, rather than just being something that was owned by one group versus the other. The other thing is we built accountability into our practices. So we had been working around putting more accountability in, actually putting people in place to own things that would make it more visible, to make sure that they were moving forward, giving our leaders goals or goals that they have to achieve, and giving them the tools in order to do it. So we've built our strategy that's not just a one-year strategy. Our goal, we have a 2030 approach. So we know that what we're doing is going to live into our 2030 because it's supporting our organization through that. We have some short-term goals for sure, and then we have some longer-term aspirations. So I believe that the way that we've approached the work has helped us to think about this as more than just a response to an event. We had diversity work happening already. We were already doing this work. And so we've just doubled down on our efforts, and we've made sure that we've built it into our organization so that it doesn't die out over the course of the new year.
And I would just add to what Demetha said. So we had formally had a focus on diversity and inclusion. And then last year we added equity. So how do we look at all of our practices in our strategic areas around how we hire and how, like what are job descriptions, for example, what do we need to do, right, to reduce those barriers that may impact people entering our organization. Workplace, culture-wise, what are the barriers that exist within our organization to prevent people from being able to advance or having a great experience, right? To our business strategy, to community. But I think that that's a piece of it, is that integration into what we do and how we do. And as Demetha talked about, that accountability. And just one little mini practice that I'm excited about, we've seen really great results so far. We launched a DEI champion program with our 4 biggest businesses with a leader from the business. Demetha's like, hey, this is a team sport, to really help drive it within our 4 biggest businesses. And we've created a cohort with those leaders along with key partners to really help the work get done. And that's been really fun to see these leaders take really strong ownership within their business line.
And I think from my perspective, we're certainly taking a cue on the accountability piece and building that in from the beginning, because that's incredibly important. The other piece, which I think is not really exciting to talk about, but is metrics. And so really thinking about what are those meaningful metrics that we're actually going to measure and that are tied directly to our business strategy. So that, and then the other part of that is helping the business see the business benefit of some of the things that we're asking them to do, and how these change behaviors and focus on diversity and inclusion actually help benefit their business and increase more meaningful communications and relationships with their customers. So those are kind of a couple of the things that we're trying to continue to hit on and reinforce as we kind of continue to build.
Ted, I just wanted to add this. What we've also started doing just this year is to put to demonstrate our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion in our offer letters, so that new faculty, new staff coming in to our college understand that we are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion. It is valued in our college, and these are the requirements within 2 years of your employment that we expect you to complete. And so we've got there's a module that was created in the Center for Inclusive Excellence. I mean, in the Center for Instructional Excellence, not Inclusive Excellence, but the Center for Instructional Excellence. There's a module that they developed that we're having all of our new faculty and staff complete. And so, we want them to know that they're serious, and Demetha and Philomena has mentioned, and also Jennifer mentioned accountability. So how are we holding people accountable? And so we're trying to add this to our promotion and tenure process, as well as our performance reviews, because if you don't, you have to demonstrate through what you value, you need to be able to measure. And so we want people to understand that we value diversity. And so that's why we're including it in performance reviews, as well as the promotion and tenure process.
Excellent. Ebony, did you want to add to that discussion at all?
Yeah, I guess just to round us out, for us, it's about really probably working with our other NGOs and in the youth development space, and continuing to, I guess, do our part to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion remains at the forefront of a lot of the collaborations and a lot of the focus going forward. And hopefully through that'll impact those students going into higher ed, which would then lead into them going into industry. So we hope that we're just doing our part at the grassroots level to continue to make sure that this is a focus and providing broad exposure to more underrepresented groups to get involved.
Great. We're almost at the top of the hour. I think another one that I might offer too is to Mark's question is, like, continue to work in organizations, backbone organizations like Together We Grow. In my organization, we work across sectors. And knowledge sharing is really important. It's just critical to be able to learn, what folks are doing in other parts of this space, and to keep those networks going. And I, for one, I do, Dr. Morris, agree that maybe we're traveling a little too much, but man, I'd sure love to have this meeting in person sometime. So it's a good group of folks to see. So thank you all so much for contributing to a really productive discussion. And I'm sure that anybody on the panel would be more than willing to connect offline with anybody in this group if they have questions for follow-up. So Kristen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Ted, thank you. And thank you to each of our panelists as well. I feel like each of you so much embodies the change-making, innovation, collaboration, and that heart-led leadership that I think we all benefit from. So thank you for making time and for sharing the amazing work you're doing.